and especially women. So tonight we're going to discuss how education, educators, and learners everywhere have been affected by the pandemic. We'll look in three general areas. The first is kind of educational trends in the broader society. Then we'll move to what happens on our campus as we educate future teachers. And then finally, we'll close with a more practical session where we look at the impact of what's going on our children. So to start out, I'd love for each one of you to just take a moment to introduce yourselves a little bit more fully and to share a bit about your expertise or special interests that you have. And I'll ask Terry to start.
Okay. Hi, thank you. So my name is Dr. Terry Rodriguez, and I started like Maria. I was a high school English teacher for 7 years. I've been in teacher education though since 2003. So I don't know how many years that is. I'm not going to count. My partner served in the military, so I was lucky enough to have been able to teach middle and high school English all over the world. I taught in Berlin, Germany. I taught in Kentucky, Georgia, and Puerto Rico. And then I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I got my PhD in curriculum and instruction. I directed an alternative teacher certification program there. That was a really enjoyable experience. And from there, I went to work with pre-service teachers at Duquesne University, which is kind of similar to St. Ben's and St. John's. I finally landed back home here in Minnesota in, I think, about 2013 with my partner and my youngest daughter, who was a high school sophomore at the time. At St. Ben's, I teach literacy education courses, mostly preparing middle and secondary, the methods courses for pre-service teachers. I do research that looks at supporting teachers of culturally and linguistically diverse students and preparing pre-service teachers to practice culturally relevant pedagogy and social justice pedagogies. So I currently have a really exciting project that I'm totally into, funded by the Spencer Foundation, to listen to teachers' stories of how they're supporting refugee and displaced students, especially during this time of the pandemic.
Thanks, Terry. Diana, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Diana Fenton, and I am mostly involved with the science and science education in the education department at St. John's and St. Ben's University. Education actually was a second career for me. Coming from a background in research, I went back 20 years ago to obtain my certification to become a teacher. So most of my experience was in a middle school and high school teaching science. My passions include the idea of equity and access for all when it comes to science in the science classroom, and that stems into some of the work that I've done at St. John's and St. Ben's with the Mellon Grant. Promoting women in science is another passion of mine, working with a project with actually the sisters at the monastery who are celebrating 140 years of science with the sisters at the Hain Museum, that museum exhibit that didn't get to open last April. I guess even though that education was a second career to me, I've always been an educator in and out from the time I was in elementary school, middle school to grad school. Education has always been an important component of my life. I feel like I'm a lifelong learner, and I enjoy the position I have now to train teachers, pre-service teachers, to go out into the classrooms for tomorrow.
Thanks, Diana. Maria, would you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. My name is Maria Stanic-Burnham. I graduated in 2001 from St. Ben's. I actually chose St. Ben's because I was going to be a nurse and then realized that science was challenging, and I fell in love with an English class. And so that sort of led me into English secondary ed. I've been a teacher for 20 years. I also have a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from St. Scholastica. I got that pretty early on in my career. I also have a license as a K-12 media specialist. So I've spent 7 years in a high school library setting as well. I primarily right now teach 9th and 10th grade students, but I've taught in a variety of districts, and I've taught everything from 7th grade language arts all the way to college writing for seniors. So I've had a wide variety of experiences, and I've done quite a bit of coaching as a teacher, everything from speech team to student council to tennis teams. So I feel like I've dabbled in it all in my 20 years of education.
Thanks so much to all three of you for introducing yourselves. And I think everyone listening can see why you are well equipped to join us in this conversation tonight. So I want to start out with some questions, really talking about larger issues related to education in our society. One of the things that we know is even prior to the pandemic, we were facing kind of a looming teacher shortage, and that there's lots of reasons for that. I think the pandemic may have worsened that in some ways. And so my question to you is, what can we do as individuals and as citizens, really, to create an environment where we can attract and retain, good qualified teachers? How can we show support for them, and especially for our Benny teachers who are out there? So Maria, maybe you can start, but then I'd like to hear from Diane and Terry.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that are very easy things to do to support teachers. I'm definitely seeing the trend of a teacher shortage, and that's been very challenging for us in a variety of districts to hire good qualified teachers. It's a competitive market if you are a new teacher. So I think that's good for our new teachers that you could have several job offers. When I started teaching, that wasn't the case. It was pretty competitive and it was harder to get a teaching job. I think that there are just lots of little things that we can do as communities and parents and even students too, just showing support, being patient. I always tell everybody, just assume the best. Everybody's probably just trying to do the best they can. And I think support of teachers goes a long way, whether it's just in the communication you have with your neighbor or your friend. If you have children, showing your children's teachers support with positive language, support when needed from home. And it's pretty simple, but I do think districts are going to be in really tough spots here soon. So it's important that we have good quality teachers and find people who are excited about education and educating youth and get them into education programs.
That's great. Great. And then Diana, what can we be doing to help attract the teachers that we already need and we're going to need even more of?
Well, I think one thing is we should now realize more than ever how important teachers are for our children and their daily lives and for their learning and for their growth, and just be supportive. So when the discussion comes up of what profession might your child go into as they go into college, that teaching is a really rewarding and amazing profession. And it's not, sometimes always not looked at because maybe the salary isn't as high. But I can say that it is one of the most rewarding professions you can imagine. And I think that's why I was steered away from education from the get-go, which I mentioned to earlier. I didn't start out in education, but that truly was in my heart. And just to allow that conversation that education is a really rewarding career, and it offers a lot of flexibility with your life. And it's also allowed me to continue on my education. I was able to go back to school and obtain my doctorate while I was a K-12 teacher. I was very lucky to be able to do that. And there, are programs for financial assistance. I taught science in a high needs area Title I school, and I was able to get loan forgiveness. And that sometimes isn't even mentioned, that there are programs to help with the financial part of going to college for these degrees. So just supporting that this is an amazing career, and it is something that sometimes gets overlooked when making that career choice.
That's really helpful to know, because we can all talk about it and we can lift it up as a profession, like, as you've said, that's immensely rewarding. When I think about like our current Benny teachers, people preparing to be teachers, I wonder, are there, resources or programs or something to help our current education students, to help prepare them to be able to be, survive and thrive, to be retained in the teaching profession, to help them not just enter the profession, but to stay in the profession and thrive throughout their career? Are there some, resources that are available to our students, and what do those look like? Terry, maybe you're aware of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I would start with I forget what it's called. Diana, remind me, the Minnesota State, all students become part of the state teachers union.
Education.
Teacher Education Minnesota, right? When they join the education program. And I think they should continue with that kind of active political involvement.
Okay.
The other thing that's been really helpful in my career, and again, I was kind of moving around a lot, but there are professional organizations in your content area. So for me, it was the National Council of Teachers of English, and then whatever state I was in had a state. So we have a Minnesota Council of Teachers of English. And that is such a great way to connect with other, like-minded colleagues. You have your colleagues in your building, but you should definitely extend your networks outside of that. So broadening your networks at the state or the national level. And all of those professional organizations provide, they have great websites full of resources. They provide conferences that you can go to. One thing that is kind of controversial in a teacher's life is this idea of professional development, because sometimes it seems like it's something that's being done to us instead of something that we get to drive ourselves. So I think the more, teachers always know that they are lifelong learners, and the more they can drive their own professional learning through engagement and involvement in those professional organizations, I think the more satisfied they are with their own careers. So there are the professional orgs. And then another thing I was going to mention is there are just lots of what are called professional learning communities, PLCs. Sometimes they're called communities of practice. And so they're just smaller groups of teachers who get together to reflect on their practice and improve their practice. And one of the affordances of technology, and maybe we've learned this even more through the pandemic, is that we can now Zoom with teachers all over the country and reflect on practice together. So
how would a teacher find out about those communities of practice, or what is that kind of a word of mouth thing, or are there places you can go to learn more about that?
Yeah, I think you could Google it, and then I'd say Google it in your state. So one that I'm really aware of, because a friend of mine works in it, is the Western New York Network of English Teachers, YNET. And they do conferences, they host like student publication events, poetry readings, and that, she's in Western New York, but because we're doing everything digitally now, I get to engage with her and my students get to engage with her students. I know that there are lots of local things like that going on too. So I would start again just with your local professional organizations. And if you're not seeing what you're looking for, you can get a little bit broader. But the National Council of Teachers of English, for example, I'm sure Diana has this for science, their website is filled with ways to connect locally and across the country and globally.
That's great. That network of support is not only important, I think, intellectually and professionally, but you'd need that personal support network sometimes as well. And I probably put a plug in for the Benny network of teachers too. Maria can maybe speak to that, but I'm guessing that you support one another as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kathy. There are a couple of things that are available to students. There's a program called Interaction, which allows students to reach out to alums who are maybe in a particular field or in a particular area, and if they have questions. And so I know that that's available, and I've had lunch with a Benny student who was considering a career as an English teacher. So that's another option, is to, if you're a St. Ben's or St. John's student, or St. Ben's student, I suppose we're focusing on St. Ben's tonight, that you can reach out and find another Benny alum teacher, just somebody to find a mentor. Once a student graduates too, we have a mentorship program where if you're a new teacher, you can be paired up with a veteran teacher or somebody who's been in the profession a little bit longer, somebody to kind of, bounce ideas off of or ask questions, or somebody to just be there to be a listening ear. And so there's lots of programs available for our current students and once they become alums.
It sounds like the president of an alumni board who sponsors those here. That's great. That's good for our students to know. Diana, is there anything you'd add in terms of resources and support?
Well, one thing, now that I'm at St. John's and St. Ben's, I'm the only one that teaches what I teach. And so I often feel like I might be isolated in my own island, but what I help pre-service teachers is see the variety of resources that you can get on social media. I use Twitter just for educational purposes only and follow the groups. I do so much learning and connecting. And what I like about it is it's asynchronous. I don't have to be somewhere at a certain time, but I can go back and read threads, and I get ideas from my classroom, and I get support from people that are in the same content area that me and at the same like level. And that's really helpful. And you can kind of dabble with it and put yourself out there a little bit at a time. You don't have to lead anything. And it's just really, I know the professional organizations like Terry was talking about, I'm a part of the Minnesota Science Teachers Association. We put our content out on there. So your professional organizations use that, but also individuals. So I know, Maria, you're a tech person, and I know that your district uses it, and the different people in your district use it to share out ideas of what's going on in their classroom. And sometimes it just broadens that aspect of, in a place to get support.
Great, thank you. Those are wonderful suggestions. So I hope we have some Benny teachers listening out there who maybe have, learned about some resources that might be available. I want to go back to the kind of the recruitment of teachers and the teachers that we need for the future, and really to just kind of note that women, and particularly white women, are predominate within the teaching profession today. But that hasn't always been the case. And so I'm interested in knowing how that came to be and what we can be doing to create a more diverse teaching body, which we I think would all agree is important for the future. Maybe Terry, do you want to take a crack at that? And
Sure.
let me hear from Diana.
Yeah, I know it's really common to think, when you think of the classroom teacher, I looked up an Education Week article just prior to this tonight, and the average US classroom teacher is 43 years old. She's white, she's a woman. She earns about $57,000 a year, and she's been teaching for about 20 years. And she's highly educated, most with a master's degree. Right?
You just described me to a T almost.
So, yeah, the teaching force nationally, that's about 80%, right? It hovers around 80% for being female, for being women, and also for being white. And so historically, we know that women didn't always work outside the home, right? Women didn't even really go to college to get trained for a profession until maybe the late 1800s. Thank you, St. Ben's, right?
Yep.
So depending on what was kind of going on socially and politically and economically, whether women were in the workforce or not, like during World War II or during any war, when men were fighting in wars, women went into the workforce. So there have been times historically over the last 150, 200 years where there have been more teachers who are women and less, fewer teachers who are women. So we do know that when women go into the workforce and become teachers, they're working at, they have the same education background. So men who have that education background go to a different position and get a higher paying job.
Okay.
So women are earning less than men with the same education in teaching, but they're more likely to be working outside of the home, if that makes sense. And we're finding that it's in more industrialized countries. Like the wealthier the country, the more women are teaching, and they're still making less money with that much education than men would be making, if they were in that field. Okay. So it has a lot to do with how much we're willing to pay teachers, and so women are often in lower paying jobs with the same amount of education. We know that across the board, whether it's education or anything else. And then in terms of it being more white, one thing historically in our country is, we had the civil rights movement and desegregation in Brown versus Board of Ed, which was wonderful for students and, making sure that schools were integrated. But what we really lost was a generation, and now probably 2 or 3 generations of Black teachers. So a lot of Black teachers lost their jobs as a result of desegregation, and they have not been able to regain traction. Okay. So that was sort of an unintended and very negative outcome of Brown versus Board.
Your comment too about teacher pay and advocating for that, to go back to an early question, what can we do as individuals, citizens? And obviously one thing we can do is advocate for higher compensation for teachers, and that would address some of these issues at least. Diana, what would you add to that?
I guess this goes back to our conversation earlier of just promoting the profession, making men feel like they belong in the profession. And so one of the things that we've been doing at St. John's and St. Ben's, we have an education club, but we've also, another faculty member, Alicia Peters, has started an education club just for men, where she brings in male role models, male principals, male teachers, because there are so few in the classroom. And they have and talk about issues specific to men in education, because right now we know that the numbers are lower. And the more we can build the role model and we can see that this is a great profession to be in, the more men might be attracted to this profession. And so we at the college are also working on ways that we could provide some sort of financial awards for men of color and things like that, where we've been working on some ground work with some possible grants. That's how we need to get a more diverse population at St. John's and St. Ben's, but also really get our underrepresented groups into this teaching profession.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to talk a little bit now, switch gears and talk a little bit about something that we often read about. So a lot of times we read about the racial disparities that exist in educational outcomes. And I wonder if you could help us kind of understand more about what that means and maybe what we can be doing to address it. Terry, let's start with you.
Yeah. So when we talk about disparities in outcomes, we're usually talking about standardized test scores, which is usually how that is reported and what it looks like. And so you probably know that we live in what's been called the era of educational testing known as high stakes accountability. And so from the 1980s onward, there have been political movements that prioritize standardized testing as a way to measure achievement. What I'm not saying, what I will say right now is that obviously standardized testing is not the only way to measure achievement, right? We can see children learning in lots of other ways that a standardized test can't capture. So I absolutely have a bias against standardized testing being like the one thing that tells us who's learning and who's not. Right. But that's kind of politically where we are. So you've heard of No Child Left Behind, the Every Child Succeeds Act. But what these acts did is purposefully tie school funding to test scores, so that schools that showed failing scores or that they weren't able to serve a population of students could be literally taken over. And in some states, entire school districts were taken over. And so that results in privatization and voucher programs that in the end are really in effect defunding public schooling. So we still don't really have research-based evidence that shows that the political movements since the 80s have improved achievement. In fact, especially for students from minority and low-income backgrounds, it's getting wider, the disparities are wider. So what we really see is this, what Gloria Ladson-Billings calls the achievement debt. She'd rather not call it the achievement gap. So she tries to take these economic terms of debt versus deficit. So if you understand an annual budget and you have a budget deficit, which shows a shortfall for the year, that's very different than looking at like the national debt, right? Which is, I think of it as the tip of the iceberg and the debt is what's underneath, right? It's accumulated wealth over time. And so when we focus on test scores in a year or a couple of years and just try to, like get rid of what we perceive as a gap at the very, very top, what we're ignoring are all the complex foundational reasons that the gap exists in the first place. So, I think some of the solutions that have been, like tried in, especially in states like Texas, where the high stakes accountability really got going under President Bush when he was the governor there, the kind of testing in which kids were spending a couple hours a day in test prep classes. I had a teacher friend who was a third grade teacher, and she just started teaching math, and she had to spend test prep math 3 hours a day, right? They had to come to school early, take an hour during the day, and then stay after. And these kids were in third grade, like 8 years old. And she had them coming to school, throwing up and crying on the day of the test, because they knew no matter what they did in terms of their coursework and their grades and coming to school every day and participating and having friends at school and being social. If they didn't pass that test, they didn't get to go to 4th grade. That's why it's called high stakes, right?
Yeah.
So holding students back because of their score on a test.
And all those hours spent in test prep classes are hours that you're not spending maybe in a more holistic, manner being educated, right?
I think the best analogy I read was one researcher who said, okay, consider this, if you spend 2 hours a day in test prep and it's a multiple choice test, if there's 4 answers and 3 of them are wrong, you're spending 75% of your time contemplating wrong answers. How is that good education?
That's a really, I think that image of the debt is a really powerful image. So thank you for sharing that. Diana, what would you add to that? How do you see that playing out, and what can we do to counter it?
I think what can we do? I think maybe this is a good thing from the pandemic is one thing at St. John's and St. Ben's, we don't require now an ACT score, which I think sometimes is a barrier for students, because I know my own 3 kids, we could afford taking a test prep course. We could afford taking it 2 or 3 times, which is a financial obligation to get a better score. And to take that, it seems it was more of a game to try to just pay to get a higher score. I think to take that off it eliminates a barrier to some who don't on that one day perform on that one high stakes test, that we look more holistically at what the education students have to bring them on to a college board. But also the other thing that we need to do is make sure that we have adequate supports when they transfer from high school to college. So there isn't, we've noticed in our own department with some of the research that we've done is that some of our students don't do well in a particular class, a math class, and that eliminates them from getting admitted to the education department the first time. And so knowing that and recognizing that, we need to provide supports to make our students successful when they get to college. Right. And I think there are, it's supporting the students where they're at versus trying to have them make up that debt.
Right. So for those who are watching, you may know or may not know that we, St. Ben's and St. John's, have gone to kind of a test optional for ACT tests, which is a change from the past. And for the reasons that Terry and Diana have mentioned here, and also because there's no research that really that ties performance on the ACT with success in college too. So there's just better indicators of college readiness and kind of that can predict success later on in higher ed. So that's a really good point. We've made that shift right here to that test optional work. Let's kind of moving on, because you've touched on issues of equity, Diana. So I want to kind of follow up on that. Now, I know you mentioned the Mellon Becoming Community Grant and some of the work that you've been involved with. I know that one of the things you've done is to do an equity audit of the education department. So what have we learned from that audit that you can share?
Sure. And if you want to pull up the graphic. So in our education department, we've been fortunate to have funding from the Mellon grant over the last 3 years to perform what is called an equity audit, which, as you can see from the graphic, is a multi-pronged approach to where we looked at multiple factors within our own department. This was kind of looking in with a lens at some of the practices that we have. And so we did surveys with our introductory course, we did focus interviews, we did workshops on rewriting language in our syllabi to make some of the practices we have more inclusive for all. And what we found in our equity audit uncovered quite a few things. First of all is the supports for our secondary minor, which our students have a major in another content area and then a minor in education. They didn't feel as supported. And so from that and some of the other comments from our focus groups, we've actually developed a mentor program. And now we have 2 education ambassadors in our department that are students. They're employed by our department to work as liaisons between the faculty, between the incoming students. So we learned that students needed support, not just from faculty, but from other students, that It really has helped in creating conversations to ask questions that they might not have asked. But it's also have had us take a look at some of the who is in our program. And this is where we know that we have a need to recruit underrepresented students. We looked at our demographic data, and we know, based on even the statistics Terry reported, that we have the majority of our students are white females in our education department. And this is something we need to grow. We need to recruit. We need to get students from all areas into our program. Anything else, Terry, that you'd like to share? Terry was a part of the Mellon group as well.
Great.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. I think the Education Ambassador and the mentorship program is a really tangible and visible outcome that is a product of the equity audit. From my perspective, that demographic data piece was really important because when we started the equity audit, we found that we weren't really keeping track. We didn't really know how many students from diverse backgrounds we were even getting to apply to the program. So just making it visible, I think, and also making that visible to students that we not only want to know, but we want to provide the supports and we want to grow it. I think that kind of spreads a different reputation and a different word around campus.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. I want to switch now and talk about our Benny alum teachers. And as it happens, we have one of them right here on the call tonight, Maria. I have to say, when I'm out visiting, talking with alums or donors or friends of the college, I hear pretty regularly people talking about the high quality of Benny teachers. And there's schools, whole schools that seem to be populated with a majority Benny teachers. I hear it often enough where it feels like it's not just an anecdotal thing, but it's a real thing, right? So I'd love to hear from you, Maria, as one of those outstanding Benny teachers. What do you observe when you see your kind of Benny sisters out in the profession teaching? What do you see? Are they as good as what I hear all the time?
For sure. I think, I think one of the big factors in teaching is, are you ready? I mean, moving from it was called student teaching when I was in college, but moving from being a pre-service teacher to an actual teacher is a huge leap. And to be ready for that, I mean, nobody's ever totally ready for it, but to be ready for that is huge. And so it comes across in interviews, it comes across in experience. So I find that even just student teachers are well prepared to be student teachers or pre-service teachers. And then that translates all across their career. So, they're willing to learn new things. They're open-minded. They're well-rounded because of the liberal arts background. And so, I find that Benny teachers are natural leaders within their faculty and staff. They maybe move on to leadership positions, not necessarily even just administration, but maybe department chairs or lead teachers on a grade level. I just find that Benny teachers are leaders. They're strong. They're always learning. They're willing to grow and change with the times. They're positive. And I really truly think that the Benedictine values that we learn on campus come across too, like just those soft skills and being able to be personable and hospitable for students. So I just think it's the whole package. I think what we learn on campus really translates well into the job. And to be ready for a career in teaching is everything, because if your first 2 years are difficult and you're not prepared, the likelihood of staying is far less. So I can't say enough about how important it is that teachers come in feeling prepared in their first few years of teaching.
Well, thank you, Maria, and kudos to you and to the others. I hope there's some Benny teachers listening to the show tonight. Kudos to you, but also then thanks to our faculty, Diana, Terry, and the others on our education faculty here at St. Ben's and St. John's for doing a great job in preparing those teachers, because it is something you hear regularly. And Maria, you spoke to it beautifully. That's probably a good segue to talk a little bit about what happens on campus in our education department. And I wondered if maybe Diana, you could give us just kind of an overview of what the education curriculum looks like at St. Ben's and St. John's.
Sure. Well, we have two major tracks. We have either elementary education or we have a secondary education minor. And so if you're a secondary education minor, you pick a major. For example, my students who are in science, they would be a biology major, and then they would be picking up their their minor would be in secondary education. And so the programs are a little bit different, but I think one thing that Maria led to, that why our students are so prepared, is we get our students out in the classroom from the very beginning in the introductory course in Ed 111, usually the first or second semester that they're on campus. And so we have them in the classroom to kind of know and get the feel if this is what they really want to do from the start. And we then have elementary and secondary multiple checkpoints along the way where they're out into the classroom, you know, throughout the whole 4 years. And so I think this is what makes our students prepared for the classroom. We do a lot of research in our department. We're looking at latest trends. We're looking at, for example, culturally relevant pedagogy. We are looking at technology integration. We are not teaching old practices. We are cutting edge as far as we are researching new things that we need to be talking about in classroom with equity. And I think that is what makes us so different, is we are preparing teachers for tomorrow's classroom, not just today's.
Oh, that's great. I want to make sure we allow some time for questions from the audience, but it's been so interesting talking with you. There's millions more things we could ask. I do want to ask one more practical kind of question before we turn things over and solicit some questions from the audience. And that really would be any advice and guidance that you can provide to, whether it's parents or grandparents or just adults who are involved in the education of their children or grandchildren in this time where some of our students are learning virtually or in a hybrid kind of way. What advice do you have to adults who are caring for kids in that way? And are there some resources that might be helpful for them to have? So maybe Maria, I'll start with you, but I'd like to hear from Diana and Terry as well.
Sure. I just think about, I have two children and they're in 7th and 5th grade. So I'm experiencing this both as a parent and I'm married to somebody who's not an educator. So I sort of see it in both lenses. I think, first of all, I think it's important to understand that we are allowing a lot of grace, that this is a time of grace and understanding, and that everybody really is doing the best they can. I think it's important that teachers take that stance and think of their students as a whole person, and to allow grace there and understanding and ask questions and assume the best. I really think that that's the key to everything, that if there are things that are confusing, to, depending on the age of the child, to ask them to ask the teacher. I've spent a lot of time teaching my students email etiquette, like, what are the best ways to ask for what you need in a polite and respectful way, and assume the best of me, and I'll assume the best of you. And I really think it's about relationships right now. And so hopefully people are developing relationships and realizing that this is a very temporary situation. And it is difficult, but we're getting through it, and we're learning things that we didn't expect to learn. Yeah. And that there are things that maybe there might be some gaps, but we'll figure that out along the way. And teachers are going to work really hard to do that, and families are working really hard to do what they can. So
much of I was just going to say, so much of what you've said sounds very Benedictine, back to your earlier yes. point. Terry, what advice would you have?
Yeah, so my youngest right now is 23. So I'm working with pre-service teachers who are doing their practicum and their student teaching virtually. So that's really interesting. But I think if I were on the other side, if I were the parent over there right now, I just think it is a really cool opportunity to get more involved. So I know, like in my own English classroom, I had a reading workshop where students got to choose their own titles, and I encouraged them to tell their parents what they were reading and to talk about reading at home. And if I could, like bring the parents in and say, what are you reading? Like we're a reading community. So I think, I know I can't even imagine how difficult it is for parents right now. And I'm not having to go through it from that perspective. But I remember having teenagers go off to school, and there was always this wall, like they wouldn't tell me. I'd be like, how was your day? Don't talk to me. Yeah. What did you do? you know? So it's, if there's any way that it can at least provide that little bit of like, get engaged with your kid, like alongside your kid. And I really want to support what Maria said, like honor the knowledge of the teachers, you know, and do not speak disparagingly about teachers or what they're doing, because they're in your home. You've invited them into your home, really. You know, we didn't have a choice, right? Zoom is in our, you're in my house.
Thanks.
So just know that it's part of hospitality, you know, and community, and honoring and respecting each other.
Thank you, Terry. That's lovely. Diana, advice that you would have for
I think
families to...
both Maria and Terry said almost everything. I just want to say patience. We are doing things that we've never been asked to do before as educators, teaching in multiple formats where I have 3 online and 12 in a classroom and 4 online, and people coming and going. This is something we would never have envisioned even probably last January, to be honest, that we would be. And so just patience. And I think get engaged with your student. I have a senior who's a senior in high school, and then I have 2 older who are doing college. And so this has just been a very interesting watching them try to navigate their education. And I think to me, what's been empowering is they've had to figure out a little bit more on their own, which I kind of appreciate. Give the teachers grace. I think they are doing a phenomenal job given a short period of time and in uncharted waters.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diana. I'm going to open things up now to questions from the audience. And remember, if you've put in any reflections about a teacher that's been very impactful in your life too, don't forget to add those to the Ask a Question button. So, Anne, do we have any questions or comments from the audience?
We do. I first want to mention that I understand that we had some technical issues at the beginning of the broadcast. So hopefully you did hear the request that we are asking you to share the name of the teacher that had the greatest impact on your life. Please make sure to include your name and class year in your comments so we can do a shout out. And if you have a name of that teacher, we'd love to know who that is so we can celebrate them. So speaking of which, Susan from the class of 76 said that she student taught at Sauk Center Elementary School in the fall of 1975. It was a very different time for sure. She said she was blessed to have Connie Zierden as her CSB student teaching supervisor. She learned so much from her and still rely on her wisdom. So one of the questions she had was, what is the student teaching experience like during the pandemic? I know you mentioned a lot of it is virtual. Is there any other details you'd like to share?
We've had it virtual, but luckily many of our students now this spring are actually getting in-person experiences, if not hybrid. So last spring, most of our students were in a in-person placement and then transitioned into the distance learning. And now this year, we've kind of had a little bit of both. Our students have embraced every bit of this experience. And I think that if nothing else, they're coming out of this even more prepared because they're really having to be creative to figure out how to get the same content across in a virtual platform.
Great. Terry, anything else about the student teaching?
I would just say that I've been supervising student teachers for about 15 or 20 years. And this semester, especially with them being hybrid, I'm observing virtually. So I'm one of the Zooming in students, and I am amazed at what our student teachers are doing. To me, it's like they're juggling 5 balls at once, you know? And so a really simple thing that new student teachers know is hard to do, and that's how to get to know your students. The first thing you have to do is learn their names. When you're a high school teacher, you have 100 kids a day. And so we're like talking about how do you get to know your students when they're wearing masks, you know?
Right.
And so that's obviously different, but the way that they're, I don't know, like they're just being resilient in such a way that they're coming up with such creative solutions for things that, like Diana said, I think they're going to be way more prepared than teachers who didn't go through this experience. And for sure with the technology, and I think the affordances of that technology, they're going to take forward with them, but they they are doing more than rising to the occasion. I would have thought they would have been completely stressed out. And not that they're not under stress, they absolutely are, but they're just taking it with grace.
They're stepping up. Thank you. That word again, grace. Anne, any more questions?
Yes, we do. Denise, class of 92, she wants to know what the panelists feel are some positive things to come out of the pandemic, and are those things here to stay in education?
Good. Who'd like to start?
I can maybe start on that one. So I do think that there are a lot of positive things that have come out of it. I think we've really, as teachers, had to think about what's essential. Fact of the matter is I can't cover as much material as I used to. So it's really thinking about, what am I trying to get to? What's important? Not that the other stuff, that I was doing wasn't important. It was just maybe a little bit more fluffy around the edges. And so I think we've really had to think about what's essential. I think some wonderful tools, technology tools in particular, have come into play that have really helped me in my classroom know each of my individual students. Like, for example, right now I'm using ClassKick, which is a free online tool, and it allows my students to work at an individual pace, and I can give them feedback as they work, and they can see that I'm giving them feedback, and so we can kind of work virtually. So I think that there are a lot of positive teaching tools that will come out of it. I think my students are more resilient. I think teachers have been forced to learn learning management systems like Schoology or Canvas in a way that will be beneficial for students and parents, and kind of bridging that communication gap. There are just so many wonderful things. I also think we've learned that there is such a thing as too much screen time, and that Zoom fatigue is real, or Google Meet fatigue is real. And so I really just think we've learned a lot of lessons about what's good for us, what's not good for us, what we want to keep, and what we want to get rid of when things go back to normal.
Good. Terry or Diana, what's come out of the pandemic that might stick around that's good?
I know for me, because I'm probably the least technologically advanced of anyone, and so we've talked about, who's a digital native and who's not, and that technology gap. And we have known for a long time that our kids are always going to be well ahead of us in terms of technology, and that we need to prepare them for a future that we can't even yet imagine in terms of technology. So this pandemic was a kick in the butt for me. So, personally for my own teaching, I am much more comfortable with technology. And again, like I said, my student teachers are integrating it in a way that they never would have had to before. So I just think that's good for the K-12 students' futures, because they are going to be using technology way more now than we do. But at the same time, I love what you said, Maria, that we've learned that that's not the be all end all, that artificial intelligence does not have to be the complete future, and we really do need to be in community with each other and face to face and have that kind of relationship too. So I think we'll appreciate that more.
Thanks, Terry. Diana, what have you learned that you think will stick around with us beyond the pandemic?
Never have a snow day again.
I don't. Was that good? I don't know if that was a good thing to come out of it.
No, I think both Maria and Terry pointed this out. It's kind of pushed where some those who were reluctant to use technology had no choice, and maybe pushed an envelope to start learning some of the tools that we have available. And it actually can simplify some of the teaching and some of the things that we do. And it's not that you have to learn every tool, but you find the ones that you like, that students respond to. And it's just teaching us how to integrate it in a better way. And so I think that as we move forward, but then also not to forget how important face-to-face collaboration and in-person learning is, and that we're seeing the social impact of that when we can get back into the classroom in person, how vitally important that is for students.
Thank you. Anne, do we have more questions?
We have a comment first about a favorite teacher from Mary from the class of 94. Her favorite teacher was Ms. Doyle, and she had the good fortune of having her as her first grade teacher and sixth grade teacher. She taught her how to count to 10 in French in first grade, which is the foundation for her coming to St. Ben's to major in French. Ms. Doyle is still teaching, and she's Mrs. Hawking now, and her lessons are still ones I come back to again and again, as she said. As a lifelong learner, she learn about what you love, be kind, and keep going, says Mary.
That's great.
We also have a question from Joan from the class of 1964. She asked, what has the pandemic taught us about learning? I know you mentioned a little bit about this, Maria, but maybe if there's anything else to mention about it, we'd like to open that up to the panel.
Oh, I've learned a lot. I think I've learned that engagement matters. We spent a lot of time talking about engagement when I can't see a lot of nonverbals about, you know, how a student is sitting in their desk, if they're making eye contact, if they look distracted, if they look sad, I think it really, I think teachers are learning a lot about engagement, how to be engaged with students, develop relationships with students early on, so students feel comfortable kind of letting us know, you know, if things are coming up. And so I think I've learned the most about what we call formative assessment, what students know along the way. Not that it's something that goes in the grade book or it's a big test, but just kind of a checkpoint. And so I think we've learned a lot about the importance of that kind of information along the way. And there's a lot of technology tools that have come along that have really helped us with that. So I think that's my takeaway right now about learning.
That's great. Any other thoughts about that?
I just think of, Maria, you can maybe comment on this from when last March, when we were pushed into distance learning to now, realizing that more screen time is not better, that captivating somebody for 3 hours or an hour, it just doesn't work. And that sometimes the smaller amounts of time. I notice my son, who was a junior, now a senior in high school, the class times and the models have changed so many different times, and that's to accommodate not only teacher preparation, but also to accommodate that students don't need to be in front of that screen the entire hour once the instruction is over.
Good. And do we have time for one more question?
We do. It's a statement posted on our YouTube chat. Lizzie from the class of 2016, she said, I taught in kindergarten in Sauk Rapids. And it was such an amazing experience that I was eventually offered a job in kindergarten at the same school. I can't thank my professors enough.
Oh, that is a pretty wonderful way to end our question, I think. So this has been just a wonderful and important conversation and really insightful. I want to thank Maria, Diana, and Terry for taking time tonight and for really sharing this. And I want to thank also all the educators who may be listening tonight. We support you, we believe in you, and I think the word grace that came up so often, so frequently in our conversation tonight, we want to lift up that word for you to experience that grace. And the three of you who are teaching here at St. Ben's and up in Sauk Rapids. So thanks to the three of you. I'm going to turn things over now to Anne. I'd like to let you know we also will be sharing some resources from St. Ben's at Home, including some of the things that we've talked about tonight. Also, I'd ask any of our Benny teachers who are out there, if you know of resources, things that you can share, please let us know. You can let Anne Sumangill or Val Jones know, and we'll share them more broadly with our other Benny alums as well. We want to keep you connected and supported in some of the ways that Maria was talking about earlier on. So as we log off tonight, I want to thank our speakers tonight. I want to thank all of you for listening. Please stay on for final comments and details about the next episode of St. Ben's at Home that you'll hear from Anne. So now I will turn it over to Anne Sumangill. Thank you.
Thank you again, Diana, Maria, Terry, and Kathy for your time this evening. Audience, you can share additional questions or comments in tonight's episode through the evaluation form that will be emailed to you by the Alumni Relations team. Please join us next month for the March episode featuring the topic of women, leadership, and athletics. We will be joined by Nicole Hess, CSB volleyball coach Maddie Schwartz, student athlete, and Marcia Malum, Assistant Dean of Students and Director of Campus Recreation and Club Sports. They'll be discussing the benefits and lessons learned as we explore gender in athletics. We are able to offer this online event free of charge due to the generous support from alumni and friends. If you're interested in ensuring that programs like St. Ben's at Home continue, please go to givecsb.com to make a gift. You can find additional details about St. Ben's at Home, the series, on the landing page listed here. We'll also share this link in the evaluation email you'll receive tomorrow. Thank you all for attending and have a great night.